Okay, this is Exercise 8.2, AverageTemp. So we're asked, can we solve this problem? Uh, Consider the following program with the input underlined. So it looks like we want our program to prompt the user how many days temperatures would you like to input. They put in an integer number, a whole number value. So 7 in this example. And then it looks like the user's prompted for that many number of temperatures, and the user supplies those. And then the program spits back, well, here's your average temperature, and it also calculates how many days were above this average. So if any of these values were above that average, it keeps a running tally or a count of those and returns that back, prints that out. I went ahead and I gave you some starter code, so I've gone ahead and downloaded that zip file and opened up the project that was in there. And you need to make sure that you store that in your Module 8 folder on Google Drive, please, so you don't lose it. And here is the starter code. I've given you a screenshot. We'll open it up here too. And if you take a look, there is a lot of comment in here. So at the very top, it gives you a general idea of how this works. It prompts the user for the temperatures they will input, then prompts the user for each temperature. Each temperature that the user inputs is stored into an array of double values. We want to be able to store temperatures that have decimal values in them. The program then calculates and displays the average temperature, and then finally the program determines and displays how many days were above the average temperature. So the first thing you should do is put your name and the date. So today is the 17th of January 2018. Okay, so I broke this down into steps. I do not want you to delete these comments. I want you to leave them in. They're great for reference, especially when you go back to see how this works. There's other methods. There's 2 other methods in here besides the main one, and we'll get to those as we move down into the steps. Okay, so the first thing that happened here is that we created a scanner, so we need to make sure that the scanner is imported, and it looks like it's already imported for you. Because remember, scanner is not part of the standard Java library. Okay, so we've created a new scanner called input. So we're going to use that variable to store any values that the user provides. Okay, so first we need to prompt the user for how many days temperatures they will enter. So that's just going to be a simple print statement. System.out print. I'm going to go ahead and use print and not print line so that the number that they provide will be on the same line as my prompt. So I'm going to say how many days temperatures. And then I'm going to put a space so that their entry will not be flush against my prompt. Okay, so that's the end of that. So now we want to actually store the input that they provide us. And they're going to provide us with an integer, a whole number, because we don't want a temperature for a half day. We just want for like 4 days or 5 days or 6 days. So I'm going to create a new integer called, we could just call it days. And we're going to go ahead and grab the next integer that the user types. So we need to reference our scanner that we created here. So input dot, and to get the next integer, we're going to put next int. That's a method, so we need to put those parentheses there. So that went ahead and stored the input that the user provided after this prompt. So we now want to create an array. And remember, this array is going to store the temperatures, which can be decimal point numbers. So we want to create an array of doubles. We can call this array temperatures. And we can go ahead and initialize the size to be the amount of days that the user specified, because that's how many temperatures they're going to give us. So that's how big our array needs to be. So we're going to go ahead and say new double, And then instead of putting a number in here, we're going to use the days variable. Okay, so what that does is that goes ahead and it creates an array. So say that the person gave us the argument 7. They gave us 7. So it's going to create an array of 7 spots filled with, actually these are doubles, so it's actually technically going to be 0.0. An array filled with 0.0 since that's the default value of a double. So that's what the array is going to look like at this point. But we don't want an array full of 0.0s. We want the user to be able to give us the values to fill it with. So I'm getting ahead of myself. So this should be under number 2 because we're storing the integer, the next integer value the user enters into an int named length. So let's go ahead and change that to what it says. Always read the directions. So length, and then this is for number 3, create an array that can hold the number of temperatures the user specifies. It should be an array named temperatures that holds doubles. Use the variable length to initialize the array's length. So I actually didn't use length, I used days, so I need to make sure that gets changed too. So there we go. So we created an array of doubles called temperatures, which got the value of a new array that was as big as length is, which remember initially was days. I went ahead and changed it to be consistent with the comments. Length is the number of temperatures that the user wants to give us. Okay. So now we have this array filled with 0.0s, and now we need to create a for loop and index values to fill. We need to use a for loop along with index values to fill the array, and we need to be able to prompt the user each time to provide us with that. So we're going to go ahead and create a for loop here. So just like the last exercise, we want to start at the beginning of the array, and so we know that an array's index values, so I'm going to put this under our example array here. So our index values are going to be under each spot here. So it starts at 1, starts at 0, then goes to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that's our index values. Up here is our array that holds our elements. Okay, so now we want to be able to iterate through this array starting at 0 and entering a value that our user provides, and going to 1, putting in the next value, all the way to the end of this. Now remember, the length of this thing is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But the last index value is 1 less that, so it's the length minus 1. So we'll go up 2, but not including the length. So we're going to go ahead and start at 0. So we're going to say for int I equals 0, that's our starting value, our initial value. And we're going to keep going until I is no longer less than the length of this array. So we could put temperatures dot length to get that value, or we could just use the variable that we created up here, which is called length. Okay, so this goes up to, but not including the length there. And then each time we go through and we iterate through, we want to make sure that we're increasing the value of I by 1. So that we can go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 and then to 6. Okay, so every time that this for loop iterates through, we want to prompt the user for a value. So we're going to go ahead and print that prompt out. And I'm going to use a print statement here so that the user can provide those values on the same line. So I'm going to go ahead and use a print statement instead of println. And I'm going to say day, and then I want to put the number of a day. So what is a little bit strange here is that we're starting at 0, and we don't want day 0's temperature. We want day 1's temperature. So what we can do is create an expression, I plus 1. This is not changing the value of I, it's just printing out the value of I plus 1. So if I is 0, it's going to print out 1. So this is going to say day space 1. And then I want to put apostrophe S. So this is going to say day 1's. And then I want to put temperature. Temperature. There we go. And we want to put a space so that the user's number will be after that space when they type it. Okay. Let's go ahead and compile that. And those errors are here because we've got some other things going on that we haven't gotten to yet. Okay. Oh, actually no, I need to use my string concatenator. There we go. And now we've got just the errors because of the ones we haven't gotten to. Okay. So remember to constantly be compiling your code to make sure that you don't make any mistakes that will be hard to find later. Okay, so we've written our prompt. Now what we want to do is to be able to grab the values that the user's typing into the print stream. And remember, these are going to be doubles. And we want to be able to grab those and put them into their proper position in the array. So remember, this is what our sample array looks like right now. It's just a bunch of 0.0s. Okay, so we want to go ahead and we want to reference the array, which is called temperatures. And we want to reference the index value where it's at, and we're using I to keep track of that. And we're going to give it the value of the next double that the user types in. So we're going to access our scanner that we created, which is called input. We specified it up here. But instead of looking for the next int, we're going to look for the next double. So we're going to say input.next double. So temperature sub whatever is going to get the next double. So starting at 0, we're going to position 0, we're going to replace the value in here, which is 0.0, with whatever double value the user provides us with. Okay, so for example, a user might enters, let's say they said today's temperature was 87.5, okay? And this is in the first iteration, so this is the first time that this is executed. So now this array here, this 0th element is going to be changed to the value 87.5. Okay, and this would continue to iterate through, continuously prompting the user for a temperature until it reaches the limit, which is up to the length. And then this entire array would be modified to have all those different values that the user input. So this should rightly populate our array with user input. So what's our next step? Our next step is to store the average temperature to a double value named average. Okay, so we need to create a double value called average, and we want that average to be the result of the call calculate average, which gets a argument, which is the temperatures array. So I'm going to pass it temperatures. So this is passing that entire array that we just created up here in the for loop to this method, calculate average. So now we should skip down to calculate average to make sure that we implement that method so that it actually calculates the average. So let's see what we have here. It says traverse the array with a for loop to first sum the temperature values that are held in the array using the variable sum. So we already have this variable sum that is going to add all of the values in the array temperatures together. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and calculate and return the average temperature. Okay, so step 1 is to just calculate the sum. So we're going to use a for loop. So we want to traverse the entire array from the beginning to the end. We're going to start at the beginning, so int I equals 0. Notice how I can reuse I because remember, these these variables are local to their methods, so they are not global variables. So you can actually specify I in this method, calculate average, in main, and then in other methods as well, because they are local to their method. Okay, so for I, starting at 0 up until the end of the array. So notice how I just said these are local variables. So I can't reference length up here because it only belongs to main. So what do? Well, I did pass in the temperatures array. So I can use I is less than temperatures dot length. So that'll give me the length of the array itself. So I'm going to go up to, but not including the length of the array. And of course, since I'm going from left to right, I need to increase I each time I iterate through this. Okay, so now we're going to open up the body of this for loop. And what do I have to do? I have to access each of the values in the array and add it to the sum. So sum is initialized here as 0. So each time this for loop iterates, oops, let's take this. This belongs to the next part. Oh, need another curly. There we go. All right. So each time this iterates through, we're going to go ahead and take the value, we're going to modify sum so that it adds on whatever value is in that position of the array. So we could say sum equals sum plus temperatures sub I. And what this would do was would take, let's for example take the first run through. So sum is first 0. So sum would get the value of 0 plus our first value in the temperatures array. So if you look at our example right here, let's pretend that this is the array that we have right now. It would get the value of 0 plus 87.5. Okay, so in other words, sum would get the value of 87.5. Okay, so that would modify the sum. And then it would go through again and keep adding each value until it got the final sum. Now, for shorthand, instead of saying sum equals sum plus temperature sub I, we could just say sum plus equals temperature sub I. It's the exact same thing. It's just shorthand and you will see it on the AP test. Alright, so we've calculated the sum, but that's not exactly what we want to do. We want to return the average. So getting the sum is just the first part. After the for loop, we want to calculate the average. The average is going to be a double because our sum is also a double. And we're going to be dividing. So we're going to create a new variable called average. And that's simply going to be the sum divided by the total number of elements that we just added together, and that's going to be equivalent to temperatures.length. So now we have the average. The last thing we need to do is we need to return that average. So we're just going to put return average. So now this value gets passed back to that method call in main right here. So now that value that was stored in average in this method is assigned to this variable average in the main method. Okay, so now the next thing we need to do is to print out the number, we need to print out the number of days above average, but we also want to print out the average weather. So we're going to go ahead and put system.out print, and we can go ahead and say average temp with a space. And we want to put in there the average. So it's going to put average temp space and then whatever this number turns out to be, semicolon. Okay, now we need to print out the number of days above average, and we're going to do this through the method calculate above average days. So let's go ahead and we're just going to say here that we're going to print out the result of calculate above average days, which gets again the temperatures array. We're going to pass it the temperatures array, and we're also going to pass it the average. So let's take a look at the order of those parameters. First, it's expecting the average and then the array. So we're going to pass it average, and we're going to pass it temperatures. Okay, so now this method call goes down here, so now we need to make sure that we've implemented this. Okay, so it looks like we have a local variable called total here, and that's initialized to 0. We need to now traverse the array with a for loop, and we need to compare each element to the average. So that tells me that we need an if statement, and it even says it right there. And then if the temperature in the array is greater than the average temperature, we need to increase the variable total by 1, so that every time we encounter an above average temperature, we're adding 1 to that total. And then finally we're going to return the total. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and traverse through the array from 0 to the end. So for int I equals 0, and again we don't have that variable called length, so we're going to reference temperatures.length for our limit here. So as long as I is less than temperatures.length, and then we're going to, of course, increase I each time by 1. And within this for loop, we're going to go ahead and fix that real quick. Okay, so within this for loop, we are going to we're traversing the array, and we're comparing. So we're going to check if whatever element we're checking, so temperatures sub I is standing for index, if that value is greater than the average temperature, which we passed in as average here, and then we're going to go ahead and increase total by 1. So total plus plus. We don't need an else because we're just going to do nothing. So we could just leave it there. So every time it encounters a temperature that's greater than the average, we're going to add 1, so it's going to keep a running total. After this for loop ends, total is going to have that total number of above average days, so we want to return that number. So this value within total gets passed back up to that method call in main right here. So it prints it out here. Now if you want to make this easier to read, you can actually store the total to a variable here above the print statement so that you have an int called total that gets that value, and then just print out total. Either way is fine. Okay, so remember to test your code, compile, make sure there's no syntax errors. One thing that I just noticed is that we want average temp. After we print out the average temp, we want to return a new line so that the next message that we print out, which is going to be the number of temperatures that are above average, can be on the next line. So we'll go ahead and return a new line there too. Also, we don't just want to print out the total, we want to tell the user what that is. So we can say number of days above average. And then we'll compile that and make sure that there's no errors. And we'll go ahead and run the main method. We're going to go ahead and feed it some test values. So I'm going to say 10 different temperatures. I'm going to feed it 90, 80. We'll give it some decimal point numbers too. 50, we'll say 100, and 98.75. Oh, one more. 87.5. Okay, so our average temperature is 83.35, blah, 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 blah. We didn't use any formatting, so it's returning quite a large amount of numbers after the decimal point. And then it kept track of how many temperatures, how many days temperatures were above this average of 83. So we've got 87, 98, 100, and 90 are all above average. So that's 4 different ones, and these 3 days were not. So we returned and printed out the correct number of days that were above average. So that's how you do it.